working with the technical team at ReconAfrica the last few years on some of their exploration targets, and here to share the story is Scot Evans, the CEO. Oh, you're over here. I don't see you.
Okay, good morning, everybody. If you're like me, you're really happy not to be on Zoom. So it's good to see people getting back together. And I'm going to make sure that I don't run long, so I'll set a timer. So, we are it's kind of like the other end of the E&P life cycle from the wonderful talk you just saw from Comstock. We're an exploration company. We're at the beginning of the oil and gas life cycle, which means exploration wells, the first 2D seismic, and conventional resources, something we in North America don't really remember very well, onshore conventional resources. So I'd like to give you an introduction today to our company and our opportunity. There we go. Forward-looking statements. So we have the great, I'll say, skill and luck to control one of the largest onshore, I'll say, newly discovered basins, one of the largest in the world. We have the entire basin under license, 8.5 million acres in both Namibia and Botswana. We, in 2021, had a very, very active year. We drilled 2 exploration wells, the first 2 in the basin. We completed our first 2D seismic program, tying that together. We had discoveries of heavy oil and gas shows in both wells. Did net reservoir work with the help of our friends from Netherlands Sewell in the first well, had over 200 feet of reservoir rock. We are now just put out a press release showing the integrated results of this oil, of the wells, seismic, aeromag, surface heap, all the data put together. And so we're now in our second round of 2D shooting, and we'll begin drilling again later this quarter. We are very happy to be in Namibia and Botswana. For those of you who don't know those 2 countries, they are very stable, under the rule of law, and very good terms from a royalty perspective and otherwise. A catalyst this year in 2020, and we're really looking forward to going forward. So just a little about the company. We are a Canadian company. We trade on a TSXV. We have $80 million of cash, which is sufficient to fund our programs this year and a little beyond. We own our own drilling rig, and as a geologist, owning a drilling rig is sort of something that I would never comprehend until once you have one and go through the last year we've had. It's been a huge advantage to be able to drill our wells, stack our rig nearby, shoot our seismic, and go back to it with complete ownership of the rig. We really lucked out on that. And again, we are well posed to complete our drilling programs and expand our exploration project this year. We have a very seasoned group of individuals, 2 of which are here, Grayson Anderson, Investor Relations, and Nick Steinsberger, who is SVP of the drilling company, proud owner of our rig. As well as myself, I am a geologist by training, dozen years with Exxon, went to a company, some of you may remember Landmark Graphics. We got bought by Halliburton when Dick Cheney was running it, and I finished my career with Halliburton as a vice president and have been in the CEO position for 18 months now here at ReconAfrica. Certainly one of the most exciting parts of my career, I'll tell you that. So just to talk about Namibia and Botswana, wonderful countries, and for those of you who've worked a lot of Africa, they obviously are southern Africa. So Namibia is a former German colony, only became independent in 1990. And I'll talk a little bit about Namibia and petroleum in general and why you're seeing Namibia in the news of late. Part of it is they only gained their independence in 1990 from South Africa. As many of you might have experienced, the first cut of the petroleum laws had a little scooching to do. The petroleum laws became quite, I would say, amenable for companies to work with. So you see the majors, you see companies like ourselves coming in. And the basin itself is under the Kalahari Desert. So there's reasons why Namibia is just being in the news today. Botswana, adjacent, and the basin goes into Botswana on its western edge, is of Africa's longest running democracy, former UK colony, sovereign nation in 1966, actually. Both wonderful countries to visit, and again, we have great relations with the government there, been very cooperative. They push us, and but we're a good partnership. License terms, again, important. We have a 90% working interest partnership with NAMCOR, the National Oil Company of Namibia. We have our export rights continues in the first round till 2023. It's a production license. I'll say that again, production license for extendable for 10 years, 5% royalty, 35% corporate tax income, and an additional profits tax. So all in all, a good place to do business. Botswana. Also, we're early in Botswana. We just picked up that acreage after more extensive Aeromag 2 years ago. And again, a production license with favorable royalties. So two great places to do business. We'll zoom back out. The overall geography of Africa, for those of you who are familiar with it. We are up in the northeast corner of Namibia. Some of you are more familiar with Angola, which is a long-standing petroleum province. Really a hub for the major service companies, Halliburton, Schlumberger, et cetera. And that's proved to be useful for us in terms of getting our service company support. Our basin is large, probably about the size of Switzerland, and we're in the northeast corner of Namibia, the northwest corner of Botswana. Now, I mentioned Namibia is kind of an emerging country in the news. Well, why is that? Well, again, two reasons. One is, again, offshore, where you've had some exploration over the last decades, again, wasn't really available to the market until after the 1990s. So in the big picture, not a long time span. You've probably all seen success as announced offshore with Shell and with Total. Varying representations in the press of the size of these, but certainly enough that these two really great major oil companies are very, very happy and are expanding their, obviously going to be working that for years to come. We are onshore, and you can see this is a topo map, and so we're under the Kalahari Desert. The basin that we discovered, again, nobody really looked until after independence, but the country was smart enough to fly aeromagnetic data on its own dime. We were the first ones to interpret it, and using Bill Cathy down in Houston, realized that there's a basin here, and it hadn't been drilled, and the nearest well was 300 kilometers away. So the founders of the company, Craig Stanke, picked up the leases in 2014, and so we are now at the point where we are actively exploring. And again, really exciting results so far. The 2021 program proves an active petroleum system, light oil, natural gas. The seismic has shown a number of targets. I'm a geologist, so you have to put up with a little geology next to the slides. This is a rift system. It's associated with what's called the Southern Trans-Africa Rift System, running roughly east-west across the acreage to the coast. If you look at onshore sub-Saharan Africa, the great majority of all the major fields are in rift systems, whether it's the East Africa Rift, the Central Africa Rift up in Chad. And so the geology of our area is linked, if you will, tectonically to all these events. And so our seismic is showing very clearly that what our regional geology and smart guys like Jim Granath and his work pointed out has turned out to be true. It's a rift system. Onshore, obviously very intimate relationship with the people of KAVANGO, with the government. I've been there many times. I'm going back in 2 weeks. And so we'll talk about our ESG efforts towards the latter part of this, and extensive, especially for an exploration company. But we do have the shorter cycle time in terms of the time to market and payback. And the lower capital commitment, again, makes things a lot more scalable in terms of if we are successful enough to get commercial development to time to market. So here's the geology slide. So if you think of the area we are in, we're looking at Namibia. And in this slide, you'll see a green area in the middle with orange lines in it. So that is the major rift that's going across the KAVANGO Basin. So for those of you not familiar with rift settings, visually, Southern California, where I started my career, is a rift. right? You may not know it, but there's huge fields, LA Basin, Ventura Basin, all that. Those are rifts. More akin to this area is the kind of rifting you see in the North Sea. And rifts, again, are basically features that generate both deepening events for source rock to be deposited and structuring events for them to be reservoired. And we're, again, it's fun working in conventional resources again, because I hadn't done that for a while in the States. The area that you see in green is what we have mapped so far. It's our first 2D, so we are going through a very measured, integrated exploration program that's going to be going on for several years. The area to the west, where we have the two wells that we drilled last year, and the most of the 2D seismic show clearly where the rift is. Now, as a geologist, you always know there's things that you'll find once you shoot seismic that you didn't expect. And what we didn't expect is the area in the lower left of the acreage, which it's a little hard to see on this map, but is an older sequence of nice, gentle, thrusted anticlines. Big structures, coherent. In the case of the rift, that we are seeing light oil and natural gas, probably a different source for these older rocks, gas and maybe condensate. But it's a little bit like the Rockies. If you guys have worked up there, you've got décollement horizon, and you've got lateral stress that creates these thrust anticlines. So that's something that we're adding to the portfolio, and we're very excited about that. I'll show you in a second a slide of the actual rift itself. But within the rift, there's plays in the rift, and then there's plays in the pop-up fault blocks that are inside the rift. Classic stuff. So in words, three major plays. Primary is the Karoo Riftville. Karoo is a Permian age supergroup. Permian, everything's Permian Basin. Well, it's not, nothing's 100% analogous, but if you know the Permian Basin, you have Wolfcamp and in the lower part, which are more source rock things, and as you go up the Permian, you get more near shore and land. And so the cycles, the sea level cycles, sort of bring the same things to Namibia in the Karoo rifts. Again, Karoo of tertiary age. Inside the rifts, like you see in the North Sea, you'll see pop-up blocks, which make great conventional traps, and that's where the oil is on the first well we drilled, in one of these pop-up blocks. And again, the other play we've discovered is the Dahmer fold and thrust belt. So nice anticlines with a compression origin. And we see those to be probably gas and gas condensate. We do have 4 drill-ready wells that we hope to begin towards the latter part of this quarter, focusing on the Riftville, but also one particular fault block. And then as we get to know the area and get to know the locals, they aimed us at an area that they said tends to have fires for no apparent reason. Well, we went over there, and it turns out it's an active gas seep. So along the northwest side of one of the major rift faults, there's active gas seep. We've had it analyzed, and it is thermogenic gas, i.e. gas that's been generated at depth. And we've analyzed it, and it does kind of fit consistently with the gas samples we're seeing in the wells. So this active gas seep is something that we're going to be looking for more of. But again, as you get to know an area, you learn things. Just touch on the wells real quick. The data you're seeing here, so this is the aeromagnetic data. Again, thanks to Bill Cathy, Airfield Resources down in Houston, who's interpreted this for many years. It's high-quality aeromag. The map is showing you what they call just depth to basement. So aeromag is great at finding those nasty igneous rocks in the bottom of the basins. Doesn't tell you much about what's inside. So we drilled the first well on a ridge, kind of a blue line going across it. You know, orange is shallow, blue is deep. So we drilled the first 2 wells along this ridge structure, again, hoping to catch both 2 potential traps. First well, we have 198 meters of net reservoir over 5 intervals, clastic in the Karoo, carbonates down in what we call the Molden Paleozoics. We had really good oil shows, good, okay gas shows, almost, well over, several hundred meters of oil shows. Our license at this point, or well permit does not allow us to do production testing. We hope to be able to go back in the next wells and use MDTs. But we did get some testings of the oil now. They are light. And it's clear that what we found is migrated hydrocarbons, thermogenically generated. So we were really excited about that first well. The second well, we drilled it in an up-dip location, and what we found was the edge of the rift. So the fault went through a series of, the well went through a series of faults, found the same kind of oil and gas in fracture porosity in the top part of the well, and a whole series of more dry gas, again in fracture porosity at the lower parts of the well. So the second well is to come out of the seismic, allows us to define that rift basin. For the seismic program, again, we wanted to make sure we used the most environmentally sensitive source that we could for this area. Typically, I'm not sure you use vibrosize. There was some research that said the vibrosize might interfere with some of the wildlife and their migration pathways, especially at night. So we're using what's called a accelerated weight drop, which is better known as a thumper. So basically, this is a Mercedes-Benz tractor. The thing on the back of it is a big weight. Weight goes up and you drop it. It's a nice single source of seismic. It gets deep enough so we can see what we want to. Obviously, there's more powerful sources like dynamite, or I'm not sure vibrosize would be better. But we worked real hard to make sure that we only shot during the day, that we stayed on the paved roads and paths, and used a source like this to cover the whole area. And we finished our first about 500 kilometers at the end of last year. And to show you what the data, well, here's the grid. It's also, the black is the original 2D lines. We're now shooting our second round, kind of infilling areas we weren't. It also shows, the topo map shows that we're basically in savanna country. You know, if we go far to the east, yes, there is Okavango Delta, there's the Kavango River, you can see to the north. But where we are is kind of scrubby savanna. And so what we're endeavoring now is to make sure that we understand the wildlife migration across this whole area. The other thing you'll see is that if you fly into Kavango, there's patchworks of deforestation for various reasons, whether it's, you know, the farmers making a livelihood or some, sadly, stealing of the hardwoods. So as we talk about ESG, reforestation is something that we feel very strongly is something we can contribute. So that's the seismic program. Here's what the data looks like. And overall, I was, you know, geologist, right? So I was really excited to see, the quality of the data, because I wasn't sure. I'd, you know, never worked with a thumper before. We get good data down to about 2 seconds. And essentially, you know, if we want to talk hours afterwards, I'll go through what we have. But if you look in the middle, you can see our first well. And for those of you looking at seismic data, you can see that it's up on a structural high. And if you look between yellow and red, that's the Karoo. And if you look at the section of between yellow and red at that well called Kawe 62, and you go just to the west, you cross a major rift fault, and you gain double the Karoo section. So this is textbook stuff for those of you who have worked in rifts before. It says that the Permian, that these faults were growing in the Permian, that this lower section will be, you know, more, you know, if you will, marine, for lack of a better word, or lacustrine. And you can see all the growth and stratigraphy in there with a lot of traps. The kind of the initial traps you see are these, you know, basically anticlines in there with some nice pinch outs off to either side. But we are in the process of laying this out as probably the first area that we look to sort of intensify our drilling. I mean, there's other rifts around the area. You can see to the right side of the 6-2, there's also a rift with a little less growth. But again, really excited. This is kind of what the premise of the company was, that we were in a rift basin, and we've got seismic data that now shows it and allows us to put solid leads and prospects together. Stratigraphic column, 2 sections. Again, the Karoo section with the various members getting, again, a little deeper water as you go into the older sections. Several reservoirs in there, several source rocks intervals that are in there. And then the older rocks, which the top part we do see in the fault block plays, but also would be the main contributors to these big anticlines. Older, lower Paleozoic, even, maybe at the very base Proterozoic rocks. Those have their own source intervals in the molten and carbonate rocks with core labs data showing dolomitization. And so those of you who've worked in carbonates before get really excited when you see the word dolomite. And so the upper part has good dolomitization, lower part's fracture processing, but we're certainly targeting the upper part. So that's the rocks. We have our own drilling rig. Yeah, Nick can tell you all about it. Again, as a geologist, I swear I'd never owned a drilling rig. I tried to talk Halliburton out of it for years, and now it's one of the best things we did. Infrastructure-wise, how do we get to market? So Namibia, maybe it's like German heritage, really well-developed set of roads. This slide shows, and I don't know if I have a pointer or not, but basically you can see the coast. You can see roads coming from Walvis Bay on the coast, which is where we took the rig. We refurbed the rig down in Houston in the Henderson Yard, Port of Houston, Port Walvis Bay, essentially drove it almost all the way straight to the rig site on good roads, right? I think the last part was a little tough. But the road infrastructure is fantastic. The rail infrastructure, we're about 100 miles from a railhead, so for oil monetization would be, truck to the railhead and then rail to the coast. The gas, gas is especially, I think someone mentioned earlier, has become extremely valuable in the Eastern Hemisphere. And gas to power is something I worked with for a while. We started using it over in the Bengali area of India. But this area is ideal from a gas to power perspective. It's important to realize that, especially in the KAVANGO, there's energy poverty. You go and visit folks, they don't have electricity. In the cities, it's intermittent. And what they do have is imported from coal-fired plants outside of the country. So there's a strong case here and in other parts of Africa for gas to power, and in the great debate, considering the sovereign rights of folks who don't have power, right? And so that's been one of the more interesting things for me as we look at a new development in a country that is up till now energy poor. So it's a really interesting situation that we think we're really helping the country work through. We talked about commercialization. From an ESG side, so, all three parts are quite important to us. We feel that we can be carbon neutral, as we start looking towards, given a success case. Having worked with a lot of old wells, with new wells, there's a lot of things that you can do to make sure that they're methane tighter. I mean, I saw Project Canary here. That's a lovely project that I think that we, with success, would want to, work with those kind of projects. And gas to power, like I say, so you never are wasting your gas. You're using it all the time. We've done a very extensive hydrocensus. There's also a fantastic aquifer in the entire area, but it's not being taken advantage of by the locals because it needs wells to get to the water. But we've worked with the government on the hydrocensus to make sure we know where things are. Biodiversity is really important for helping put a baseline in there. And as I mentioned earlier, reforestation is going to be, and put to, just to bring the area back in that regard. From a social perspective, very strong commitment to stakeholder relations. This is their area. They own it. They're going to be there long after we're gone. It's a wonderful community. The people are great. And I think the biggest thing we've been able to do so far is, again, around water, is we've drilled 22 solar-powered water wells so that women in the villages don't have to carry it on their head for 5 or 10 kilometers. It's amazing what folks have to do. And we've donated those. From a governance standpoint, strong commitment to local hiring. Having been in the industry for a while, the one thing I learned is you hire local and you build your structure as fast as you can. And if you don't have the people you need, you train them. So our largest employee base, we have about 500 people working from the general manager all the way through who are Namibian. No parachuting in of executives to fulfill their careers. This is a Namibian company. They're going to be determining how it's developed. Just to finish up, again, we've committed from a COVID perspective, it was a wild year. We had everything from the supply chain issues to having to put very strict regulations and processes around our camps. Our camps were like bubbles, if you remember that. It's all seemed fading quickly. But we had to put the time, and it cost money, and we are sort of a poster child for supply chain issues. If you imagine drilling a well, having something break, and having to get it from the U.S. In June of last year. We donated $1 million Canadian for COVID relief efforts. That's been really important. And we also have the water program, and we're also helping with STEM, science, technology, and engineering and math scholarship programs with the folks in Namibia. So again, onshore is a very intimate relationship. We're at the very beginning of understanding this resource. So it's really, really exciting, and one of the pleasures of my life is to work with the folks up there. So to conclude, just on time, this is one of the KAVANGO basins, one of the largest undeveloped onshore basins in the world. It's a strong government. We have great support, good fiscal terms, good regulatory and political environment. We have a good integrated interpretation that we gained in 2021. They're now expanding that proved our original premise, why we came into the place in the first place. Target-rich drilling environment, of course, expanding the drilling and seismic inventory, and we're going to begin drilling later this year. We are considering JV data rooms. We haven't made any decisions yet. That's another potential we have for 2022. So with that, thank you for your time.
Thanks, Scott. Scott and his team will be in the Yates room for any questions.